So I hope this finds you well. We have a meeting at 2. That's why I had to make these recordings before. So I hope you will go through the recordings at your own time or during the normal class hours. So today I want us to go through the mind-brain relationship and see whether the mind is part of the brain, and is the brain the one directs the mind, or or whether the mind is the one in charge of the brain. We also refer this to as the mind and the body relationship. And to study this, we have to study biological psychology, which is the study of physiological or the functioning of the body parts, evolutionary, the gradual changing of these body parts, and the developmental mechanisms of behavior and experience, which normally emphasizes on the brain functioning. So we have to study the brain functioning for us to be able to see whether, or to answer the question, whether the mind is part of the body or the body part of the mind. And if they're separate, who or which among the two is in charge of the other? And how do they interact? How do the two interact? How do the mind or the brain interact with the mind? And what or which of the two is in charge of the other? So many theories have been developed to explain the relationship between your conscious thinking and your brain or the brain. However, the most common explanation concerns the question whether the mind and body are separate or the same thing. Can we separate the mind from the brain, or are the two this same and inseparable thing? So biological explanation of behavior fall into 4 categories. We have physiological, which relates a behavior to the activity of the brain and the organs or other organs. So behavior is an activity according to physiological part of biological explanation, is that the body together with the brain activity determines the behavior of a person. Then another category is ontogenetic, which describes the development of the structure or the behavior over time. Then we have evolutionary, which reconstruct evolutionary history of a behavior or structure. So evolutionary will tell you how the structure or how the behavior have been changing over time, or gradual change of the behavior of human being over time. For example, early in the days, or early in many years ago, people used to gather fruit and hunt as the main source of food. But nowadays, we don't. Our behavior on how we normally cook, on how we normally find food, on how we normally interact with each other have changed in terms of language, in terms of many things have changed over time. That is evolutionary. Then we have functional, which describes why a structural behavior evolved as it did. So how did the structure and the behavior evolve over time? So those are the 4 categories under which biological psychology focuses on. Then deep understanding of a particular behavior is tied to being able to explain the behavior from each of these perspectives. When you identify, for example, a behavior that is normally practiced by all human beings, for you to be able to understand the source and how this behavior have changed over time, you have to understand the psychological and ontogenetic, evolutionary, as well as functional category of biological psychology. The biological explanation of the behavior raises the issue of the relationship between the mind and the brain, and also known as mind-body or mind-brain problem. So the mind-brain problem has a variety of explanation, or the relationship between the two have a variety of explanation. So the mind is about mental processes, thought, and consciousness, while the body is about the physical aspects of the brain neurons and how the brain is structured. When it comes to the brain, you can see the brain. It's a physical thing. You're able to see also the neurons or the nerves that normally transmit information that have been brought about by the brain to other parts of the body. So the physical aspect of the brain together with the neurons and how the brain is structured forms the part of the brain, where the mind is about the mental processes, how you think about your consciousness. For example, when a person dies, the brain is left behind, but the mind is no longer present. That person is not conscious. That person is not thinking. There is no any mental processes occurring in this individual. A way that we can be able to explain this to the relationship between the mind and the brain, we have dualism and monolism. So for dualism, human beings are material objects. We have weight, solidity, and consist of a variety of solids, liquid, and gases. However, unlike other material objects, e.g. rocks, humans have the ability to form judgments and reason their existence. They're able to form some judgments, they're able to think and reason different as compared to other material objects like rocks. Rocks just have the material part, but do not have the thinking capacity. So in short, we have minds. Typically, humans are characterized as having both a mind, which is non-physical, and body, or the brain, which is physical. And this is known as dualism. So dualism is the view that the mind and the body both exist as separate entities. They both exist separate. They are not the same according to dualism. Then Descartes' Cartesian dualism argues that, or these two argues that, there is a two-way interaction between the mental and physical substances. So Descartes argued that the mind interacts with the body at the pineal gland. So the mind and the body interacts in a gland of the body, the mind referred to as pineal gland. So this form of dualism or duality proposes that the mind controls the body, but the body can also influence otherwise rational mind. So the body can influence, depending on the status of the body, it can influence the mind, but the mind is the one in charge. But in circumstances, the body can also influence how the mind will function. Then we have another theory on monoism, and this argues that there is two basic types of monoism, where we have materialism, and it's the belief that nothing exists apart from the material world, that is physical matter, like the brain. Materialistic psychologists generally agree that consciousness, that is the mind, is the function of the brain. So the two is one, but to find the mind in the brain. So, but the brain is the one that normally reasons. So the reasoning here is the mind. So the second types of monoism is phenomenalism, also called subject idealism, which believes that physical objects and events are reducible to mental objects, properties, or events. So ultimately, only mental objects, that is the mind, exists, where Bishop Berkeley claimed that what we think as our body is merely the perception of the mind. So in this phenomenalism is a theory that brings about this belief that physical objects and events are normally reduced by mental objects. We see a person as a person because the mind perceives that this is a person. We see a rock, we see a chair as a chair because the mind perceives that as a chair. So we are what we think based on our perception of the mind. So that is according to the Evolutionary psychologists. So those are the two types of mannerism, where we have materialism, and we have phenomenalism. Then let's see about the genetics of behavior. So both genes and environment interact to shape human behavior. And the fundamental issue is how much a role genetics play in shaping human behavior. So how do genes depict that how a child who is not yet born will behave later in life? But genes does not work alone. Environment also have some, or the environment in which this child will grow also have some influence on the behaviors of this child. But still, the two have to exist for behavior to exist in a person. So these two will interact in order to shape the behavior of a person. For example, there's some people who have an inherited personality of drinking alcohol, but that doesn't guarantee that this person will become an alcoholic later in life. So depending on the environment at which this individual will grow, this can also shape the behavior of this individual. So genes and environment will interact in order to shape the behavior of an individual or a human being. So example is psychological disorders, weight gain, personality, and even sexual orientation. For example, a person may not even have genes on weight gain, but some may also have some genes of being obese. But depending on the environment this individual will grow, it will also determine how this person will also grow. Will this person develop obesity later in life or not? They may carry the gene, but if they're exposed in an environment that do not encourage weight gain, for example, they're exposed in an environment where we don't have junk foods, we don't have foods that normally increases weight in a person or deposition of fat in a person, this person may not gain weight. So genes and environment have to work hand in hand, or have to interact in order for the behavior of person to be shaped in a certain way. So in 19th century, monk Gregor Mendel demonstrated that inheritance occurs through genes, and genes are basic units of heredity that maintain their structural identity from one generation to the other. Genes are aligned along chromosomes. If you can remember the two pairs of chromosomes in biology, you can remember the organelles of a cell. And gene have a loci or a location in the chromosome where you find this gene. And these genes are normally passed from one generation to the other. So a gene is a portion of a chromosome and is composed of DNA. So DNA is found in a gene and the gene is found in a chromosome. So DNA serves a model for the synthesis of RNA. DNA is normally, as you're going to see here, I'll show you a structure. This is a DNA because it is having two strands, as you can see, the yellow one and the green one. But down here, we have one strand. So this makes an RNA. This makes a DNA. So DNA builds, or when you separate these two, you will have an RNA. So this RNA, as well as this DNA, normally are the one that possesses some proteins that normally also depicts how a person will be later in life. So genetics is wide, but I'm just explaining here and there for you to be able to understand this concept. So RNA is a single-strand chemical that can serve as a template model for the synthesis of proteins. So the proteins that you normally have in our body that also sometimes determine the behavior that you normally have are normally synthesized by the action of this RNA. So RNA in the protein synthesis processes will lead to the synthesis of proteins. So protein determine the development of the body. This includes forming part of the structure of the body, forming enzymes, forming hormones. Hormones are protein in nature. Enzymes are protein in nature. So hormones that normally also determines the behavior of a person are protein in nature. And these proteins are synthesized as or the raw materials for the synthesis of protein is RNA that we get from DNA, that we normally get from genes, the genes that we get from what? Chromosomes. We have various types of genes. For example, we can have a pair of genes normally known as homozygous, which means that a person has an identical pair of genes on the two chromosomes. Heterozygous means that the person has an unmatched pair of genes on the two chromosomes. And these genes can either be dominant or recessive or intermediate. Example, the eye color, the ability to taste, this will be determined by the type of gene that a person carries. So a dominant gene shows a strong effect in either the homozygous or heterozygous conditions. For example, if you have a gene, for example, let's say you're carrying a dominant gene of being homophilic, you are having a heterozygous gene in the chromosome having a hemophiliac gene. So let's say that is H. The hemophiliac characteristic is H. And this homophilious characteristics is heterozygous. So you'll have a H, another type of gene that is different. And if you have a homozygous gene, you'll have 2H, meaning that you're having two types of gene that are of the same kind. If you're having a gene that of different kinds, that is heterozygous genes. So you'll have a H and maybe a T. That T means another type of gene. So a pair of gene that is of the same kind is homozygous. A pair of gene that is of different kind is heterozygous. And these two pairs can be either, one of them can be either dominant or recessive, or they can be two dominant, making the pair of gene. So for dominant, they normally show strong effect. If, for example, you're having a gene for being tall, let's say you're having a gene of being tall, let's say the tall there, or being tall is a characteristic that is represented by T. So you'll have a capital T representing the tallness. And if this is homozygous, you'll have two capital T's. If it is heterozygous, you can have a capital T and a small h, or in a capital H, sorry. So a recessive gene shows its effect only in homozygous condition. So in dominant, when you have a dominant gene, you will have, I think we have an example here. Let me use an example here for you to be able to understand. Yes, for example, if a child that is hired by two people who have a heterozygous gene or pair of gene for testing, the two of them, so they are having a high a capital T-N, a small t, and heterozygous, a capital T-N, a small t. So if this T combines with the capital T combines with the capital T of the mother, they will form a homozygous tester, because this individual will have two capital T's. If you're dealing with a child, or the next, maybe this capital T connects with a small t to form this heterozygous tester, so that child will have a dominant gene and a recessive gene. That child will have this T here, small t here will combine with the bigger T here. So they'll still form a heterozygous tester. And when the fourth child is born, and maybe this child inherits the small t and the small t of the mother, that is the small t from the father and the small t from the mother, this child will have a homozygous gene. But remember, this homozygous gene is a recessive gene, meaning that this person will be a non-tester. So these two are testers because of the dominant gene TT. This one is a tester because they're having two dominant genes. So we have the dominant gene and we have the recessive gene. When we have two similar genes, we refer to that as a homozygous pair of genes. When we have two different types of gene, we have the recessive and dominant gene, a pair of gene, we call that as a heterozygous pair of genes. So I hope you've gotten that thing or that concept. So if the person is carrying a dominant gene for red eye color and a recessive gene, or a pair of dominant and recessive together, that is heterozygous, definitely that person will show a red eye color in their eye. But if they do not have the dominant gene, they only have the recessive gene together, that person will not show a red eye color, because the recessive gene for eye color is, or the genes that normally carry the eye color is recessive. They're not showing, they do not show their effect. And they only show their effect when they are in homozygous status. So almost all behaviors have both a genetic component and an environmental component. Researchers study monozygotic from one egg and fraternal from two eggs, twins, to infer contribution of heredity and environment. So you will find twins that are from the same eggs, or from one egg, from one egg, that is one egg broke into two, and that formed the identical twin that we normally call, or that we normally refer to as identical. Those are monozygotic twins. Later in life, even if they have similar genes, they carry the same genes because they are from the same egg. They have similar genes. That's why even when any transplant is done to them, they are not, or they are not exposed to the transplant rejection that is normally often with other people that are not from the same egg. So due to this, since they normally carry the same gene, that doesn't guarantee that they will have similar behaviors later in life, because the environmental component comes in to shape the behaviors of the two people. So you'll find one person likes this, the other person do not like this. This person have this kind of behavior, the other person have a very different kind of behavior because of the influence of environment. So researchers also studied adopted children and their resemblance to their biological parents to infer heredity influences. So you will still find children from the same biological parents having different behaviors because of the environmental component. Even if they're carrying the same genes, as in the case of the identical twin, they will have different types of behavior because of the influence of environment. So genes do not directly produce behaviors. Genes produce proteins that increases the probability that a behavior will develop under certain circumstances. So environment will now come in order to shape that behavior, to either check in into what the genes will cause a different type of behavior in a person, or even contradict to what the genes may influence, or to contradict the either contradict the genes influence behavior, or even to confirm with it. So genes can also have an indirect effect, such that genes can alter your environment by producing behaviors or traits that alter how people in your environment react with you. So there are some genes. Remember, we said genes can be either dominant or recessive. So if they're dominant, definitely this behavior must be portrayed in this person in one way or another. And the way we behave will alter how the other people in the environment, or how the other people that you associate with, will interact with you. Then we have evolution, part of biological psychology, which refers to the change in the frequency of various genes in a population over generations. So depending on what you're exposed to right now, the genes might mutate, might change, depending on the exposures over time. So genes that were passed to our great-great-grandparents have been changing, have been evolving over time. We have the same gene, but the genes have changed depending on the exposures over time. So regardless if helpful or harmful to the species, evolution will attempt to change these genes. So evolution attempts to answer two questions. How did some species evolve, and how do species normally evolve? So evolution also comes in to shape our behavior over time. So how species did evolve involved the tentative construction of evolutionary traits, and how species do evolve rest upon some assumptions. So offspring generally resemble their parents for genetic reasons. Mutation and recombination of genes introduces new heritable variations. So genes may change depending on, since nowadays people are interacting with people from different countries, people are marrying different ratios, people are marrying different tribes, people are marrying different kind of people. You'll find a dwarf marrying a person who have normal height. So the combination of these two genes will definitely interfere with the genes that this dwarf have been carrying, and also the genes that this other person have been carrying. And also mutations, the changing of these genes over time have also introduced the heritable variations over time. So certain individuals successfully reproduce more than others do. So you'll also find, depending on the survival for existence status in a place, so you'll find some tribes becoming extinct, some ratios becoming extinct, because individuals will reproduce differently. Africans normally reproduce a lot. When it comes to the other part of the world, they reproduce less. So over time, you'll find now the Africans becoming many in the world as compared to the other one, and they will intermarry with other people, such that there will reach a point where we will have less and less ratio differentials, or genes that, or people that shows distinct when it comes to skin color, when it comes to other characteristics such as eye color, the height of the person, all these characteristics of a person will vary, and also behaviors will vary, because also these behaviors, as you have seen, can be inherited from one generation to the other through gene inheritance. Then we have still under evolution, artificial selection, where individuals are chosen with desired traits, or individuals with desired traits are normally chosen and make parents of the next generation. So individuals with non-desired traits, you'll find, due to this survival for existence, there'll be some artificial selection. This is according to Charles Darwin. And this artificial selection, those with undesired characteristics will be extinct, such that you'll find later in life, majority of these undesired characteristics will be extinct. So this passing of these genes to the other generation will also be determined by evolution. So some of these, there's some of misconception that are normally involved in evolution. And the first misconception is that the use of or disuse of some structure or behavior causes an increase or decrease in that behavior. So some people believe that, or some theories have this thinking that when a person uses a hand for a very long time, the hand will become longer. When you use a hand, or when you portray a certain behavior, the more you portray it, the more you increase the behavior in you. Another misconception, humans have stopped evolving. Still, people are changing now and then because of gene recombination, because also of gene mutation. Then we have evolution means improvement. It doesn't necessarily mean improvement, because you'll find some genes becoming extinct, and these genes are very important. So there'll be no improvement if at all these genes are extinct or they become extinct. Then another misconception is that evolution acts to benefit the individual or the species. It doesn't necessarily mean that evolution, okay, in some way it normally helps in benefiting this individual. It normally leads to improvement of these individuals, but in some other circumstances, evolution will also not benefit in one way or another the species. Then lastly, we have, we still under evolutionary psychology, which focuses upon the functional and evolutionary explanation of how behaviors evolves. It normally assumes that behaviors characteristics of a species have risen through natural selection and provide a survival advantage. Example, differences in peripheral color visions, sleep mechanisms in the brain, eating habits, and temperature regulations. So due to natural selection, where the nature will select, depending on the characteristics of a person, the nature will select who will survive and who will not survive. For example, right now we have coronavirus. There are some people that will have the coronavirus and die. There are some people will have the coronavirus and heal by themselves. That is natural selection. Those with undesired characteristics will die and become extinct. And those with desired characteristics normally survive and pass and reproduce and pass the genes to the other generation. So this behavior, or normally this evolutionary psychology, normally assumes that behavior characteristics of a species or of a person have been changing through natural selection and provide a survival advantage individuals. That's why some behaviors have been passed from one generation to the other. So the other assumption of this evolution is that this behavior have been changing over time, and it contributes to how the genes normally are passed from one generation to the other, and how these genes have been changing over time. So I hope you've understood, and if in case you have any question, you can contact me during the next class or during or using my contacts. So go through this, and also you'll also find an assignment that I've posted for you. So do this assignment. The assignment deadline is after 2 weeks. So make sure that you do and submit the assignment before the given deadline. So all the best. Let's meet next week.